So I took this die and turned it into a 3D model. How? Because if you've ever used reality capture or any kind of photogrammetry before, you know that it is a pain when the subject is small, flat, solid color, or shiny at all. And this is all 4. And the way I did it wasn't actually photogrammetry at all. I just used my flatbed scanner and scanned all 6 sides and used that as a basis for the 3D model. The caveat is that this method only really works if your subject is flat on ideally most sides, if not all. But in my case, the die is flat on all 6, so that works out. But let's actually jump right into it, because the first thing you want to do is actually scan your object. So in this case, I'm using just the default Epson scan software. Yours might be different depending on what scanner you're using, but this one is pretty easy. So if I just change from full auto to professional, I will get a couple more options and a new thing opened up. And from here, essentially the only thing we're going to play with is the resolution, because we want it as high as humanly possible. And in my case, with the die, it's super small, so I can do that. Because by default, this software kind of limits you for how big a single image can be. So if you're scanning the whole bed, you're capped at like, I don't know, it's like 720 or 800 or somewhere around here, you're capped. But we want to unlock the super duper high resolution. So to do that, I'm going to preview it. And what that'll do is, you might be able to hear it in the background. It's doing a little test scan, and it's just seeing what's on the bed right now. And so I'm essentially going to drag a selection of this cube and tell it only scan this area. And so by doing that, we kind of unlock, if that's what you want to call it, the higher resolutions. And so now we can do 12,000 without getting an error message. So I'm going to go ahead and scan. I think a couple warnings are still going to pop up. And once that first one is done, then you just do the same thing for all the other sides. And once all 6 are done, they should look something like this, where it is super duper high resolution scans with every dust particle and scratch and little like discoloration and everything, because I find it's better, because obviously we're not going to use these super high resolutions in our textures, but you get better results if you scan high and then scale that down rather than just scan at a medium resolution to begin with. But what this is, the real reason this is good is because the lighting is more or less uniform. The only problem would be like these rim lights here on the top and bottom, but we can easily patch those out in Photoshop. But otherwise, this is really kind of soft lighting that isn't going to be hard to remove. But before we can remove any of that, we actually need UV, so we got to model this thing. In my case, the die is just a cube, so it's pretty easy to model, but in Blender, I'll just go add mesh cube, and in edit mode, I can bevel the edges because there's a little bit of curve on those edges. Actually, give me a couple of segments, and there, that looks pretty good. I'll select all of that and then face shade smooth, and so now I have a smooth die. Pretty easy, but let's say you had something a little more complicated. I'll go ahead and hide that, and you can just add a reference image by going into one of your orthographic views and going add image reference, and then I'll grab one of my scans. So in here, place the image, and voila. So I got my little reference, and you just essentially just trace it. So I want to get a single vertex, so I'm going to add a mesh plane. Actually, I'll actually change my mind. I'm going to get rid of that plane and add a mesh single vert. This sometimes is here, sometimes not. I really don't know what's up with that. But yeah, anyway, so I'm going to go back to my orthographic view, move the vert where I want it, and then just extrude it. So I got it and move it around, and easy as that. You just start tracing it. Obviously, I don't need this tool because it's a die, but you know, in the event, let me hide that plane. Something a little more complicated, you can start tracing. Anyway, getting off topic. From here, I am going to bring my cube back, select it, and go into the UV editing tab to show you. I mean, I already have UVs because the cube comes by default UV'd, so I don't got to do anything, but I want to export a snapshot of this. So I'm going to go UV, export UV layout, and then once I have this image, I'll just put in my downloads. I can open this in Photoshop. So now it's just a matter of dragging and dropping into Photoshop. So I have my image, I will drop that in, and I'll do a couple things. Go ahead and make a new fill layer and a white layer so I can actually see what I'm doing, delete the mask. And the reason I'm using Photoshop here is just because I'm better at it than like Substance Paint or something. I could probably do this part in Substance, but I'm more confident in Photoshop. But anyway, so what I want to do, actually, before I do that, I'm actually going to increase the resolution here. So it's a little low. I'll just call it double it. And there we go. So I essentially want to drag and drop my images into these 6 different tiles, but I want to mask it out first. So I just drop my image and then, play with it later. So to do that, I am going to use folders. I'll make 6 folders. And then I'm going to use so each one of my images is going to go in one of these. And then I'm going to start dropping a bunch of guides. So when I make masks for each one of these folders, I'm not just kind of roughing it out. I'm actually putting it precisely where it should go. So I know that if I were to just drop a guide, it does not snap to the pixel, but I want it to. So this is going to be a little technical, but I use a rectangular marquee tool here. And if I drag a selection, that does snap to the pixel. So then I'll start dropping guides that way. And yeah, pretty much just start chipping away, dropping guides in between each of these tiles until I have them all. And so now I am going to start organizing all my stuff into folders. So I'm going to name every one of these because they're all numbered, all the faces of the die. So I'll just kind of use 1 through 6 to get us started. And the order is weird. I know the die doesn't just go 1, 2, 3, 4. So I know the order is 1, 5, assuming 1 is this top one. 1, 5, 6, 2, and then 3 here on the left, and then 4. Okay, so easy as that. The next part is a little technical, and the reason is, I'll show you. So if I were to drag and drop an image into Photoshop as its own little thing, it's automatically a JPEG smart object. So let me actually drag it in again so you can see it is a smart object, but if I double click into it, it is a JPEG, and I don't want that. I want a PSB. So to do that, what I'm gonna do is make this document a little bigger. I just want a document, like a dummy document, essentially, that's bigger than any of my images. And so I'm gonna drag and drop all 6 of my images, and then that'll take a second. And I have 12 in here twice, so I'll delete it. So I have all 6 of my images. Now what I'm gonna do is rasterize all of them and label them by their number. So this is 1, this is 6, this is 5, this is 4, this is 2, this is 3. And I'm going to convert each one of these into a smart object individually, not together, because then they'd be in one file. Because now when they are smart objects, rather when I dropped them in at that first time, they were JPEGs, but now they are PSBs. So in the event I need to edit anything, this is a much safer workflow. It could prevent you a lot of headache in the future if you need to make some tweaks. But anyway, so they're smart objects, so the resolution is saved. And I'm just gonna scale these down. And okay, get them roughly the same size, and I'm gonna start kind of roughing in the shapes. But before I do that, I'll probably do the masks first. So I'll put the mask on every folder so it's appropriate. So now I'll just drag and drop each one of these into the appropriate folder. And in a moment, we will be ready to start putting stuff away. So 5 goes here in the middle. I'm going to hit Control T to go to free transform and then hold Control and grab one of the corners. And now I can freely pull it, kind of like a perspective warp, sort of, but in any direction I want, and really get it to warp within this square shape. So there's no distortion. The shape of it kind of bowls a little bit here at the top. So we're going to cut that out. I'd rather have that cut out a little bit. So we're going to get this roughly where I want it. And that is looking okay. I'll hit enter. And so that's good. And now if I'm going to color each one of these. I usually have my layers colored just so it's easier to read. And then I'm going to keep repeating that process for all my other ones. So at this point, you're probably seeing how it's coming together, but you're still wondering how we're going to get those seams all blended together and make this look like a real usable texture. And the solution to that is actually why I chose Photoshop at all, because it has generative fill. And the reason I like generative fill is because it'll see these small details and scratches and dust marks and so on and replicate them when we go to bleed these edges together. Whereas if I were to paint it by hand, I would lose a ton of that. Or if I were to use content aware fill, it would like just kind of bleed the colors and not like continual way. But anyway, to actually do that, what I'm going to do is make a new folder with a layer inside of it. And I'm going to keep all my generative fill stuff in here. So in this layer, I'm essentially going to mark the spots that I want generative fill to go. So I have my brush tool and I'm just going to start painting because it's on its own layer. I'll just start painting this area out and I'm going over both the seams here in the middle, but also these highlights. And I'm kind of just going rough. I specifically don't want it to be a smooth, clean edge. That's the reason I chose the brush tool over like a rectangular marquee tool or something, because if you do straight edges, that I've noticed generative fill kind of gives itself away when you do those hard lines. It doesn't really do well with like blending the shapes. So if you, as much as you can, kind of mask the fact that it was generative fill, I think that's probably a good thing. And so like using not completely straight lines is a good way to do that. So if I just go and do a little more organic shapes, I think that will give us a little bit better results. It's the kind of thing that like most people will not notice, but it's that finer level of detail. The same reason we scanned at such a high resolution at all, because like you want to just get that extra level of quality and not make it look like some AI jumbled mess, you know? You can really see it if in like the noise patterns, especially at darker images and larger sizes. Like if there's like a noise pattern, like a noise texture on your image, it doesn't do well at replicating that exact noise, the frequency of it. But anyway, getting off topic. So what I'm going to do is then just use my marquee tool to fill this area and fill that. I'm just filling these sections that I want generative fill to go. And that should only take a moment more. And actually, what I think I'm going to do is, because I've done this a couple times with this dye and I know how it's going to react, what I think I'm going to do first is take this fill layer and I'm going to add with it selected, go to FX and add a color overlay. And I'm just going to select a color from the dye. So it kind of is a bit more orange and kind of close to what the dye actually looks like, because the whole point of this is I'm trying to trick generative fill into being more textural, rather, because usually generative fill is for like if I wanted to generate an object, or if I wanted to like a noun or something, that's what it's typically used for, not so much for textures. So we're using words too, if you're in the prompts, doesn't really help either. So what we want to do is kind of trick it into being more textural. So my first try at that is I'm going to, with color overlay selected on this thing, so it kind of bleeds it just slightly, I'm going to hit Control and select my little icon. So now I have a selection of that whole area we just painted. And I am going to expand this selection. Select, modify, expand just a little bit, like let's say 5 pixels. So it goes just over the edge. And the reason I made it a similar color is because I'm hoping it bleeds these tiles smoother if it doesn't think this is like some kind of like grid-like image. But to show you, I'm going to go ahead and generate. And you can see it still kind of did it. Yeah, see, this is what I was trying to avoid, this grid-like pattern. So what I'm actually going to do is hide that. And I'm going to try one more thing. I'm going to make a new layer. And I think it's the black dots of the dye, it's recognizing a pattern there. And so I'm actually going to cover each one of these up. So in my new layer, same idea of what we just did. I'm going to select each one of these and cover it essentially, because I'm trying to trick generative fill into not thinking this is a dye, because it notices it's some kind of grid pattern, and I think that's what's tripping it up. So it's a powerful tool, but it's not really meant for how we're using it right here. So if I just cover all of these and kind of try to guide it a little bit, I think that will give us better results. So same deal, I'm gonna, with this color overlay, I'm just gonna hold Alt, drag it onto my new layer so it duplicates it. Actually, let me go for a bit more of a darker color. Something like maybe, I don't know, like that, whatever, it's fine. Okay, let's say now with those two layers, I'm going to select that generative fill layer again and then go generative fill. I'd feel a little safer. It's just a whole new generative fill rather than saying generate more. So let's see if this gets us a little bit better results. And you can see this is a little better. Ooh, actually, I think that second one was good, but I'm going to generate another batch just to be sure. Okay. Yeah, see, exactly. This is what we're going for. It did a really good job here. And so again, it's just a matter of kind of like masking it and playing with it till you get exactly what you want. And then if I get rid of my dye, oh, it covered these a bit. So what I'm going to do is just paint those areas out. So in that generative fill layer, I'm going to make a new folder, put it in that folder, put a mask on that folder, and then start painting that out. Probably be a little more precise here. And so now it's looking pretty good, honestly. Like there's a little bit of weirdness outside the UV layout, but we don't care if it did anything odd over here. Like that's not a problem. We just want this center T-shaped area. So I'll go ahead and export this. I'll go File, Export, Export As, and probably just save this to my downloads. This is loads, downloads, call it test, sure. And then for this next step, it's essentially image to material. If you've ever done that before, you're pretty familiar with what I'm about to do then, but I'll just use this color channel to generate all the other maps using kind of AIE tools. So I will open Sampler, that'll be my tool of choice here, and then I'll drag and drop my image. So I have it saved in this window over here. And I'll select image to material. The old version, B2M, you can do, but AI powered I've found is a little better. And I'll just drop it to 2048 for the time being. And that'll take a second to load, but once it does, you can see exactly what I was talking about. So use that color channel to generate, like if I look on the side, a height map, a roughness, a normal, all of that. But it clearly did not do a great job. And so I think that the first thing we could really do is go to our viewer settings here and change it from 2 to 1, because this is just one UV tile we're going to be looking at. And then the tricky part about Sampler is that you don't have a ton of control over how the image is processed because it's AI based. And like if you were to use Substance Designer or something, you probably have more control. But in this case, it's more the quick and dirty. Like I just don't really care to like get into every nitty gritty detail of this material. It'll just take forever. So I want like a faster solution here. So what I'm going to do is with my layer selected, this kind of works. It's like a big layer stack here on the right. So with the top one selected, I've already messed with this a bunch, so I know I get good results if I go to shiny, because in this case it is a shiny object, so that makes sense. But in the category type, ground is clearly wrong. It is more of a stone, because I was trying to figure out exactly what to classify a dye as, but stone is pretty close. And you'll see it did a little bit, but that still obviously looks pretty rough. I've messed with these values too, so I know that, oh, actually not in the roughness. I'll keep the base value here. I was thinking the micro details. Because this dye is so flat, I know I want a lot of micro details, but not many medium or large. And so that is looking a little better. The roughness variations I think are not that great. And so like, again, this is just a matter of playing with it till you get exactly what you want. Every item is going to be different. But eventually I'm going to get this where I like it. I think delighting is also there we go. Yeah. See, again, like I didn't know off the top of my head, delighting would have been it, but like you just got to keep clicking and dragging until you get exactly what you want. Maybe a little lower here. And then also with the roughness, I might just, that's okay. I could edit that in like my rendering software. Like once I see it in engine, then I might change some of my decisions. But also I'm only trying to look at the roughness and the normal. Not really, because I don't want a height map. And the color I'm actually going to keep from Photoshop. I don't like the color from Sampler as much as the original scan. So let's say, this is good. I'll go ahead and export this. Export as, and let me set a folder. I'll just do a new test folder. Title material, that's fine. And again, whatever, I'll export base color, I guess, but I want the normal and the roughness. So I will export those. And once that's done, I'll just go ahead and hop into my rendering software, and because I like to use Stager, so I will import my die, move that around just to show you, how it works. So if I go into the material here, I'll drag in the roughness. I'll go for the normal. And then I'll do the base or the color. And you can see that is looking okay, I guess. A lot of this comes from the lighting too and ray tracing. So, see, that's looking way better. I will drop this lower a little. And again, so much of this comes from like getting a lighting setup that looks just right to get the model looking pretty good. But I mean, for a photo scan, especially if a die that's gonna be seen at like, this big anyway, I think that's perfect. And you get just a nice discoloration, nice little flecks of dust and scratches and whatever on it. And just for reference, I could show you in the material, if I were to go from, this is the base color from Photoshop. If I did the base color from Sampler, I don't know, it loses a lot of its quality, I think. I don't know if you can see that. Like, it just, I wish I could just tab through them. But, I think the de-lighting really kind of does a number on it. But I just want, again, the normal and the roughness. So that is pretty much the process if I was able to turn this die into a 3D model. It's not that hard. It's just a lot of kind of tedious little steps. But if you want any of my project files, the thumbnail, the stager file, the model, whatever, I'll put all that in the description. So I hope that helps, and I'll catch you guys next time.